As you are very well aware, just 2 days ago, on December 2nd, here in Dubai at COP28, leaders from 118 countries pledged to triple global renewable energy capacity up to 11 terawatts by 2030. This pledge demonstrates that the transition from fossil fuels to renewables is happening and that it is inevitable, and gives us the political mandate. Yet, this is merely the start, and we need to now think about how we translate this global pledge into national and subnational levels and deliver relevant regulatory and financial policies. This includes actions such as ensuring fairer power market, more flexible power grids, and revised energy permitting and licensing policies. And we need to support these policies with the right market mechanisms, ultimately enabling new technologies to accommodate more renewables worldwide. Against this backdrop, today's event will discuss how to move the global renewable energy target beyond mere ambition and into feasibility by suggesting crucial policy tools, including delivering fair and climate-compatible electricity systems and improving planning, siting, and permitting to accelerate renewable deployment. Our event begins with some opening remarks by Mr. Stuart Mullin, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Global Wind Energy Council, which is spearheading the international wind energy movement. Mr. Mullin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. This year's COP marks the conclusion of the first global stocktake, telling us where the world stands on climate change mitigation and support, and where we're falling short of crucial action and needed to protect the planet. We already know what the final outcome is going to say. We're not on track to limit our to be well below 2 degrees Celsius, let alone achieve the 1.5 degrees pathway. The conclusion presents the opportunity for a global course correction. A step change in renewable energy growth in this decade will be the most impactful commitment that the global community can undertake now to secure a livable future for all. This is why, as already mentioned, we had over 118 countries initially sign up, and I think we're up to 120 now, so that's growing by the day, that have banded together to sign up to the pledge to triple renewable energy capacity to at least 11,000 gigawatts or 11 terawatts of installation worldwide by 2030. The global goal should send a clear signal to governments, industry, investors and civil society on the unprecedented scale up that renewable deployment is required over the next 7 years in order for us to fight climate change and deliver net zero by 2050. It's a tall order, and the Global Wind Energy Council has noted that growth for wind is still lagging far behind the necessary levels. We have agencies like the IEA and IRENA that agree on the primary role of wind and solar in achieving a cost-effective and equitable transition. This will require global installations of wind to scale up to over 3 times what they are currently today over the course of this decade, meaning rapid and sustained commitment to speeding up permitting of projects, unlocking land, sea and grid bottlenecks to increase the availability of volumes of renewable power capacity. We also need to be securing global supply chains and enhancing regional cooperation in areas of trade, finance, as well as solidarity to support developing economies in this transition. While the action needed are ambitious, they're not insurmountable. And the global pledge to triple renewable energy capacity makes our shared mission clear. We need to phase fossil fuels out from the world's energy system and accelerate wind and other renewable energy. In our view, this will then set the stage for technologies like green hydrogen and long-duration energy storage to take off. And in turn, this will support the full decarbonisation of the world's electricity sector and boost transition beyond the grid system. The sequence of change will provide the foundation for modern, climate-resilient economies and a net zero energy system. But this is not just about the energy system. It's about protecting the poorest and most vulnerable in the world, conserving nature and biodiversity, and creating virtuous cycles of renewable power deployment and economic productivity. This is the critical decade. Our challenge in this era will be to engineer the global energy transition in time without compromising economic growth and sustainable development. On behalf of the Global Wind Energy Council and our partners for this event, Solutions for Climate, E3G and ICM, we look forward to working together on actions that can bring countries and regions in line with the Global Tripling Pledge, as well as hold signatories accountable to this commitment. We welcome the discussions here today on both of these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mullen. I'd like to now hand it over to Mr. Joo-Jin Kim, who is the founder and CEO of Solutions for Our Climate, to deliver the welcoming remarks.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming and spending your valuable time here. I'd also like to thank all of those, including the COP presidency, to have gathered promises from close to 120 nations to join the tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency pledge. I think this is a very important pledge. It's great that the discussions at this multilateral convening is heading towards renewables, and I expect a lot better discussions take place after we go down the stage. I just wanted to reiterate one part of the pledge. I mean, the pledge, I found it on the internet. I've heard some colleagues that haven't been able to find it, but it is, if you search well, it is on the internet. The pledge talks about, which happened December 2nd, 2 days ago, talks about tripling renewables and what we have to do, and at the end, almost at the end of the pledge, about second half of the second page, it talks about this. The countries that basically signed the parties recognize that to support the achievement of these targets, which is the tripling renewable, doubling energy efficiency pledge, the following enablers are key. Accelerate permitting of renewable projects and related infrastructure, develop and expand grid connections and improve energy system integration, provide clarity on market design and incentive schemes, and strengthen market conditions and investment frameworks to facilitate investments in renewables and energy efficiency, promote energy efficiency, electrification, and energy demand management in all relevant sectors, raise public awareness, encourage behavioral change, increase the meaningful multiple source private and public investments, particularly for developing countries, enhance and scale new technological solutions, including through support in research, development, and innovation. The reality is that organizations like us, civil society organizations like us, haven't been really thinking about this. We've been very much focused on ending fossil fuels, ending coal, that we haven't thought that the renewable industry is facing a severe problem in actually deploying renewables. And I guess the best way to remove fossil fuels from our power system or energy system is to have more renewables in the grid. And these are especially the first and second and third, accelerating permitting, providing clarity on market design, developing, expanding grid connections. These are the things that organizations who have gathered here will have to think about and help government and relevant stakeholders reaching progress on these issues. Once again, thank you very much for coming to the event and to the panelists and to the organizers of the event. And I hope we have a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along, I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Representative Ms. Hae-young Chang, who is a distinguished member of the South Korean National Assembly, passionately advocating for energy transition for all. Ms. Chang will be speaking about the role of government in bringing global ambition into national action. Ms. Chang.
Okay, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, I am Hae-young Chang from the National Assembly of South Korea Justice Party. Maybe I look a little bit different from the photograph. It takes 4 years, so please understand, I need your understanding. Okay, thank you. I would like to express my gratitude to co-organizer E3G and Initiative Climate Mexico and Global Wind Energy Council and Solution for Our Climate, and for giving me this opportunity to speak about the imminent challenge of climate crisis and the crucial role we expect the government to play in solving it. The urgency of climate action is clear. It is now or never. The record-breaking temperature increase and the speed of melting ice in the Arctic and unpredictable weather events are threatening the lives of all, not just the global south, but of those from the global north. Amid the unprecedented climate disasters, we are gathering this year again in Dubai with a hope to make real progress. COP28 represents a critical moment for governments to realign with their nationally determined goals with the Paris Agreement and commit to keep the 1.5 degree limit. According to reports from IEA and IRENA, tripling global renewables capacity to 11 terawatt by 2030 would provide the 80% emissions cuts that are needed to limit temperature increase below 1.5 degrees. And this is the first COP where renewable energy deployment. Just a few days ago, we saw more than 110 countries have joined the effort to triple global renewables deployment by 2030. We'll need to gather all efforts to meet that goal from governments, but also from industries and research experts and also the public. The window of opportunity is closing rapidly. We must act seriously to deliver a high ambition before losing the one and only chance to correct the collective course of action. So, how can we meet this global target by 2030? The science tells us that to meet the Paris goal, we need to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy fast. However, to foster energy transition with renewable energy, we must step up and renew the current renewable policy paradigm. In many countries, renewable energy is still being treated unfairly. Because of this, renewable energy is losing the fight with fossil-based energy sources on many fronts. First, most electricity systems are not currently constructed to deliver rapid deployment of renewables, and in many cases, favor fossil fuels. For instance, electricity powered by renewables still remain expensive with poor market design. Grid and transmission are not flexible enough to allow market players to compete on a level playing field, while minimizing extensive renewable curtailment. A fair and climate-compatible electricity system, on the contrary, would be planned and operated in alignment with the Paris climate goal. With technological advances such as battery solutions and demand responses, there is a real opportunity has emerged for operators to advance the power system by, for example, unbundling the market to prevent any conflict of interest or unfair competition between fossil fuel power assets and renewables. Second, regulation and policy frameworks are another area that hinders renewable uptake. Inefficiencies and excessiveness is current planning, setting, and permitting processes are often delaying the fast deployment of renewables. Streamlined approval system and a deployment implementation plan set by the government will reduce development costs and revive the investment sentiment. At the same time, the real economic benefits of renewables should be realized in the communities, which is still a challenge facing many countries across the world. And Korea is one of them. The rapid transition on renewable energy system is an economic opportunity everybody can win from that provides local communities jobs and access to affordable source of energy. Renewable energy has the potential to pave the way into shared prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, COP28 will mark the important first step in the direction of renewable future. Let's not miss this opportunity to demand the governments to display responsible leaderships by taking parallel domestic actions to ensure a green and safe and clean future for all of us. And for us to achieve this goal to tripling renewables by 2030, all countries must revisit their current power market design and streamlining the excessive and burdensome permitting, seating regulations that slow down the speed of deployment of renewables. As a member of Special Committee on Climate Crisis in the National Assembly of Korea, I will also do my best to call for the Korean government to update the outdated renewables regulation and policy to contribute to achieving the tripling of goal of renewable target. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your very inspiring remarks, Ms. Chang. Following the keynote speech, we have a panel of experts presenting diverse perspectives about what it actually means to triple renewables. Representing civil societies, research institutions, and the private sector, our panelists will delve into pressing topics such as flexible grids, permitting and licensing barriers, and the urgent financial and investment policies required to accelerate deployment of renewables. This panel will be moderated by Leo Roberts, who's a program lead at E3G, an independent climate think tank that translates climate politics, economics, and policies into action. And he will lead an exploration of practical and impactful policy suggestions. I invite our moderator and panelists to the stage.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Esther. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for giving your time during a very, very busy COP in the world's biggest venue. So very much appreciated. As Esther mentioned, I'm a program lead in the fossil fuel transitions team at E3G, a think tank working on climate, energy and development issues. And I've got an esteemed panel of experts with me today. I won't repeat what's already been said, but the aim of this discussion is to figure out how do we take the really exciting momentum of a global level pledge and turn it into action on the ground. What are the experiences of different countries? How shared are those experiences? How different are those experiences? And how do they overlap? And how can countries, institutions, and financiers work together to figure out how to deploy renewable energy at scale? But I think we also want to talk about some tricky stuff. So what is the interplay between policies and regulation, politics at the national and international scale, and finance? And unfortunately, we've lost a speaker today who was going to speak about finance. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists who we have today to try to think through what is this interplay between their answers on policy and regulation and on finance. We have about an hour and 20 minutes, a little less, an hour and 10 minutes for a conversation. So we'll have some quick questions to our panelists to get them primed, and then it will be really good to hand over to you guys. I'm sure you will have lots of questions. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. Furthest to my right, we have Luisa Sierra Brozon from Iniciativa Climática de Mexico. Luisa has more than a decade of experience working on climate and energy issues and is an expert on the technical, policy and political aspects of delivering the energy transition. So welcome, Luisa. Thank you for being here. Next up, we're delighted to have Tilde Helston with us. So Tilde is the director of global cooperation at the Danish Energy Agency and has previously served as a councillor in the Danish embassy in Beijing and as a consultant to a range of Danish government agencies and administrations, so brings a wealth of experience with her. Thank you for being here, Tilde. To my left, we have Jihei Choi. Jihei is an ESG professional from LG Energy Solutions, so we'll be able to bring some much needed private sector expertise here. But Jihei has also spent the past 10 years working on a range of environmental, social and governance and sustainability and climate issues during time with UN Climate Change, UNDP and OECD, and Korean Research Institute, KEI, and Development Agency, KOICA. I hope I've pronounced those correctly. So a wealth of experience across a range of institutions. And last but not least, we have Thomas Koberger, the chair of the executive board of the Renewable Energy Institute based in Japan. Thomas is currently a professor of industrial energy policy at Chalmers University of Technology as well, and a distinguished visiting expert of bioenergy technology at Zhejiang University in Guangzhou. And Thomas has had a wide-ranging and illustrious career in academia, industry, and government that's too long for me to go through here. So, a very exciting panel, very varied views. I will moderate the discussion. I'm going to militantly keep these guys to time. We had an event last night with some of these guys present. They had 5 minutes and each of them spoke for at least 10. So I will be keeping a very firm check on time. So Louisa, perhaps I could start with you. We're seeing demand for renewable energy growing in many countries, but it's often not being met by the actual build-out. In Mexico, I understand that little or no new renewables capacity has been built for some time, partly caused by regulation and partly by political inertia. So would you be able to talk us through some of the key challenges in Mexico and what needs to be done to unparalyze the system?
Thank you, Leo. And I will not jump for the announcements, and thanks to E3G team and GWEC, and also for all the colleagues of Solutions for Our Climate for doing an amazing job to be here, and an honor to share this panel with the other panelists. So yes, speaking about Mexico and the key challenges that we are facing, I would say the first one, and the one that it got our attention for the last at least 5 years, has been a political one. No? I would say in Mexico, I would start saying like we would need a rapid and sustained change in the energy policy, because for the 5 last years, the key challenge has been, instead of advancing towards energy transition, has been all the efforts focused on defending the energy transition and defending the regulatory framework. Our current administration had made at least 4 attempts to backtrack the energy reform, and so the energy transition has been paralyzed. Basically, as you were mentioning, Leo, no new generation capacity has been added in this period into the system, and demand is already growing at the same pace that we had before pandemic, even higher. We got around 2.5% each year of demand growing, so that's pressuring the system a lot. And we have the situation of our current system, it's quite critical. In order to Mexico to comply with its commitments, this needs to change fast, and we have to do it as fast as possible, but also fair. So to provide a little bit context, I would start saying about these commitments. Mexico updated its NDC and committed at 35 GHG emission reduction just last year. But with this commitment, it came a commitment of achieving at least 40 gigas of renewable energy by 2030. That's a really, really nice goal, and it's quite aligned with the announcement that was made globally, and that it was mentioned by Stephen in its opening remarks. So Mexico adhered to that commitment of triplifying the renewable energy capacity by that year. It is a good news, indeed, but with that comes a lot of a challenge that has to be addressed. According to our analysis, in terms of generation capacity at utility scale, we need 44 gigas. So it's quite aligned, those numbers. But what it's lacking as well, it's not only the utility capacity, the utility scale. We need to additional 13 gigas of distributed generation systems. And what we have found out is that distributed generation systems can also come with a just perspective that I would like to address later. But let's go back to the challenges. The pace that we need to face, it's quite challenging to achieve. Why? Well, within our faster times that we were that we were adding capacity to the systems that were the long-term auctions, we were adding around 3 gigas of capacity each year, solar and wind, right? But in order to comply with the commitment that I was just mentioning, we need 4 gigas each year from now to 2030. So the challenge is quite heavy. But also, as I was already saying, our system is paralyzed. So no permitting is happening right now. And the average of the permitting time, it's around 4 to 5 years for each wind or solar. So the rhythm that we need to get in order to comply for such commitments, it's really, really high to get. So we are late in achieving such commitments. So a rapid change into the regulatory system needs to happen, right? So commitments are there and are good commitments, but in order to achieve this challenge, we need to reactivate and strengthen the regulatory framework, including the permitting time. We have an effective regulatory framework, not perfect, but one that can serve as a starting point to build upon. We need market instruments, either auctions or bilateral contracts along with the reactivation of the permits. And I would say the framework is there, but it needs to be reactivated as soon as possible if we want to comply with the commitments. Another barrier or challenge that we are facing is transmission and distribution grids. Transmission investment has been postponed for several years, not only this administration. And as I was saying, the systems is in a critical point, mainly two areas in the northwest region in Mexico, given the design of our transmission lines, and in the southeast region of Mexico. So investment in transmission are really needed, not only for renewables, but for the generation capacity that it's already needed to be put into the system. According to our numbers, we need around $4,700 million per year from now to 2030 just to solve the congestion problems that we are facing today. Another challenge, and I promise, Leo, that it will be the last one that I will address, is the challenge of fossil fuel dependency. Our matrix, it's currently has like a 72% of fossil fuel generation. And how can we get rid of that? Well, we have a good news. According to our numbers, by 2030, Mexico could get rid or phase out in a just matter the coal plants, because the generation from coal plants are quite low. And also, we can get rid of the thermal power plants that are using fossil, combustóleo, sorry. I forgot the name of combustóleo. So, heavy oil. Oh, thank you. So, heavy oil by 2035. So, that phase out is feasible according to our hourly analysis. But like the elephant in the room to get rid in our generation matrix is gas. We are dependent on around 60% of natural gas in our generation matrix. 70% of that gas comes from outside, mainly from the US. So this dependency of gas needs to get reduced in terms of generation. Around 2030, generation can and needs to be reduced by that year, and no new investments in fossil fuels technologies are needed after 2027. So that's like the good news, but also a challenge, right? So I would just conclude to say that according to our studies, like power sector is key for decarbonizing the whole economy, because it can also help to decarbonize other sectors by electrifying the processes. But we are going through a critical moment right now. We are having elections next year. So independently who wins the elections in Mexico, we need a rapid and sustained change in the energy policy towards a just energy one. So Mexico could win if we go towards a fast and towards a fair and more equitable transition from the one that we have right now. I promise to.
Muchas gracias. That was extremely comprehensive and actually a checklist of everything that I wanted us to talk about today. You mentioned finance, politics, just transition and social acceptance, fossil fuel subsidies, how to level the playing field. So I'm going to come back to you and the other panelists on some of this stuff. But Tilda, I'd like to hear from you on some stuff, particularly countries are starting from very different places. Many countries in the global north have fully built out energy systems. Countries like Denmark, it's potentially easier to build out renewables because of the size of the country and the resources available and the scale of capital available. So it seems to me that government-to-government collaboration on how to do this is extremely important, and Denmark has played an active role in this, and your agency in particular has. So would you be able to say a few words about how you see this, what needs to be done, what you guys have been doing? Thank you.
My pleasure, and thank you everyone for being here today. Yes, I will go a little far. This is my first panel at this COP, so among others, I need to get closer to the microphone, but please also help me, guide me with your questions in a little while, because that will make me be even better than just reading from my notes. But Denmark, back in the 1970s, Denmark had a crisis, you could say, with the Middle East. We needed to find new resources of energy. We could no longer import the coal and the oil that we had been doing. And we started thinking about what to do, how to become independent of fossil fuels. As in all countries, we had some entrepreneurs that started saying, well, these wind turbines, let's look a little closer at them. In the beginning, it was wind turbines onshore. But in the beginning of the 1991, this very visionary guy, he said, how about moving the onshore turbine to offshore? And that was actually what we did in the beginning. We took the onshore turbine, moved them into the water, and we got a better wind capacity. And today, just let me share with you, today, wind and solar is covering 67% of the total electricity consumption in Denmark, while we at the same time maintain a very strong security of supply of almost 100%. It's been a long transition, and we were pushed into doing it, but we actually succeeded quite well with our offshore wind adventure. But it's not just about being creative and putting turbines everywhere. It's also about seeing how can we reduce the bureaucracy. And that's where my agency comes into play, the Danish Energy Agency, because we have established what we call a one-stop shop, meaning that the Danish Energy Agency will talk to all the Danish agencies involved in getting turbines on land and onshore, offshore. We will actually coordinate with the environmental agencies, with the Ministry of Defense, with the regions. We will be sure that we are the one entrance for the developers. That's one way of making the bureaucracy less. Then also we have some other experiences. And it just came so that we 10 years ago, decided to establish global cooperation, which is the center where I'm working. And global cooperation is a center where we have 24 energy partnerships with energy authorities around the world, among others in Mexico and in South Korea, not with Sweden, but we have 24 energy partnerships altogether. And what is that? That is actually my team of engineers and government officials going and meeting with other countries' energy authorities and talking about how do we do clever regulation, how do we implement, what kind of wrong turns have Denmark done along the way, where could we maybe share what not to do and what to do. But I feel like this is so much about cooperating and sharing experiences. And of course it's great to do at COP, but it's also bringing the technical staff together around the desk and just kind of like going through, so why did Denmark take these turns, why did Denmark take these choices, and make it very much like a trusted partnership. And that is actually what we work with in the Danish Energy Agency in Center for Global Cooperation.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Tilda. I'm going to come back to you on lots of things that you just said, but let's turn to Jihye, a totally different perspective. Please do feel free to call back onto your international agency experience if you want to. But I suppose my question for you is reasonably simple. As both the manufacturer of the batteries that are essential to our energy transition globally and at country level, but also a buyer of clean energy, what do you think are the critical barriers to expanding renewables, and how do we overcome them?
Thanks a lot for that question, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. It's a great honor to be on the panel. As the only corporate panelist, I feel very grave responsibility to represent all these challenges that we are having. But I'll try to be very like a brief in terms of exchanging where we are, what kind of efforts we are making in joining the forces as we move to the net zero society. Maybe I'd like to talk a little bit about my company, LG Energy Solution, because just to give a little bit of a context, basically we are producing batteries that power electric vehicles, energy storage system, also IT applications, etc. And basically we have headquarters in Seoul, in South Korea, and also the mother factory in Ochang in South Korea, but we also have the manufacturing facilities in China, US, Poland, Indonesia. As we are expanding our manufacturing bases and then research and development bases, we think that the battery industry, as Leo already put nicely, it's a key driver to transition to the net zero, because battery is the essential for electrification of the transportation and also for the stable supply of the renewable energy. And then our vision is that as we run our own businesses, we feel that the need that we work with all players along the battery value chain, and basically we create a ecosystem where all players from minings to all these car makers come together and work on the common environmental as well as the social goals together. So that said, we believe that as we are advancing our own ESG agenda, like environmental and social and governance agenda, we think that it is very important to have a product life cycle approach, basically from raw materials extractions and to components manufacturing as well as cell manufacturing. I think it all come in hands together, and then basically we have to consider our impacts that our business make on the environment and society, and then we have to make sure that whole value chain is also considering that kind of potential adverse impacts. One of the reasons that I am saying this is that our greenhouse gas inventory shows that 70% of the total greenhouse gas emissions actually come from the scope 3 emissions, especially with the raw materials extraction. And then about 21 to 24% of the total greenhouse gas emissions is indirect emissions that is associated with electricity. And this is why a big chunk of our greenhouse gas reduction measures rely on the renewable energy transition and also ensuring our suppliers reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And back in 2021, LG Energy Solution was the first among the Korean companies who joined global campaign and the both of the RE100 as well as the EV100. And we are committed to achieving it by 2030. And then as we have set a net zero commitment by 2050, I think it's a really critical measure and critical milestone that we have to achieve along that journey. Now, I'd like to share some of the challenges some of the challenges in especially focusing on the renewable energy related this topic. So basically, each country is unique in terms of the market structure and geography and energy demands. And there are, however, common elements in terms of the regulatory and also market barriers that are bottleneck to the progress. And then basically, we feel that government commitments and pledges have not yet backed up by the sufficient regulations and policies to accelerate the transition to a power system that is dominated by the renewable energy, while at the same time, end-use sectors are being electrified to achieve decarbonization. And the biggest challenge, especially in procuring renewable energy in Korea, now that we have a congresswoman of Korea, and now we have all these important policymakers and the stakeholders that are informing the policies, we look at that, there is simply not enough renewable energy in the market. And then earlier this year, the government announced the renewable energy target by 2030, like 21.6%, which is actually lower than what was previously committed. But with the constant request to increase the target, it has now set target of the 30.6% by 2036. But if we look at the whole industrial picture, the annual industrial electricity consumption of the top 5 companies with highest consumption amounts to 48 terawatt hour, while the renewable energy generated in the same year was totaled 43 terawatt hour. And doing an easy math, you know that it is not sufficient to meet the demand from all companies. And now that more and more companies are gearing towards net zero commitments, the demand for renewable energy is drastically increasing. And then this is being followed by the cost increase, basically. And then, for example, the price of the renewable energy certificates, REC, for example, it has increased 30% this year compared to 2022. And then basically the volatility in pricing, it's kind of like issues to companies as a result. So now I just want to turn this perspective into a bit more of a business case or kind of opportunity related framings. It's because one important thing about the renewable energy transition is that, yes, generation of renewable energy is important, but also investment in the grid is also important, because you just have to simply have a storage where you can transmit the renewable energy to the distant areas where all the demands are coming from. So basically, grids are essential to decarbonize the electricity supply, effectively integrate renewables. Basically, I can share one example of what LG Energy Solution is doing, because without adequate grids to connect the new electricity supply with the demand, there is a risk that clean energy transition will stall. And then modern and digital grids are vital to safeguard electricity security during this clean energy transitions. So then, we have we produces batteries to power the energy storage systems, and then we have now, last year we launched a company-in-company, like kind of independent corporate called ABLE. It's actually an acronym of the add value to energy label, and it's kind of like in-house startup of the LG Energy Solution, and it is mandated to the capitalized energy aggregation and integrated management of the renewable energy power grid using the ESS. And then basically it runs the virtual power plants using the ESS on, we did a pilot in Jeju Island where all the solar and wind power is coming from. And then if you look at the the energy mix of the Jeju Island, actually there is like 40% of the renewable energy are there, but then only half of them are being able to be connected with the demands because of the lack of grids. So I think the solutions that we have as a company who produces batteries and also the energy storage system, we connect it with the virtual power plant, and basically we are working on this model to work on the energy aggregation and then to sort of address this this lack of meeting supply and demand side of the renewable energy. So one of the reasons that, the main reason that I'm sharing this business case is that yes, it is very important to have the regulations and the policies to have some sort of like top-down approach, but at the same time, there are business cases and there are technologies and solutions that companies have, and I think it's always good to have a pilots and then models to run using engagement with the subnational governments, and then that can then also go up and escalated or leveraged up to the central or national government. governments. I think there are more and more solutions that are coming from the private sector. So I think, yeah, I just wanted to have my intervention on a positive end. Back to you, please.
Thank you very much, Chihei. That's incredibly useful. Straight on to you, Thomas. You're Swedish, you live and work in Japan, two countries with a lot in common, but also a lot of differences. So my question to you is, to what extent are the barriers that we're talking about here and the solutions globally between all countries shared, and to what extent are they context-specific, and how do we manage that tension?
They are shared, but they're also solved to a different extent. And I think Congresswoman Hu-Yong mentioned most of the important factors, and by far the most important fundamental insight is that renewable electricity is no longer a costly sacrifice for the climate. It is now a proven opportunity. It is proven, as we have seen many countries where renewable electricity is now procured, traded at prices well below the cost of any other source of electricity. Mexico is one good example where in 2017 procurements were made for both solar and wind below $20 per megawatt hour, and now that has been even underscored by other countries that managed to get below 15 and even down to 10 for solar in Saudi Arabia. So it is a proven opportunity, and other countries can learn from those who have managed to achieve these low cost levels, because they have managed to facilitate these low cost projects, not only because the equipment has become low cost by industrial learning, but also because they've learned in their authorities, permission processes, legislation and regulation of the electricity market to provide for a fair competition between different sources of electricity. It is possible now to reduce the cost of energy supply globally and at the same time avoid the risk of unmanageable climate change. And that is a completely new situation from 10 years ago. And if we understand that and we see these opportunities as something that's actually beneficial for all, or potentially beneficial for all, it will be much easier to achieve all these regulatory reforms and overcome the resistance that the new actors in this market will face. Don't underestimate the economic interest of those who own the current power plants and fossil fuel resources. They have enormous amounts of money to use for propaganda, disinformation, political campaigning against their new competitors. But we, as well as the politicians, must understand enough and be able to be ruthless against the owners of these old assets. Let them go bankrupt. The world needs it, and future generation needs it, and even current generations will economically benefit by old, costly industries being replaced by modern, more efficient industries. But while I said that, it's also just as important to ensure that those human beings currently employed in those old industries are well taken care of during this transition. A fair transition requires a society that can take care of those individuals who suffer. But don't bother about the companies and the owners, those who have invested in these inefficient, destructive industries, but do care about the individuals who are affected. If we succeed at this, it would also be much easier to get the political support for the further development. But if the transition proves by experience to harm individuals in the old industries, they will mobilize resistance and slow down the transition. They will never be able to stop the transition, but they can slow it down. So it's very important to be able to have a transition where individuals who are negatively affected are well taken care of. Then I think all other issues that we're discussing will be easily solved. and you wanted to comment on the financial aspects. I've been involved in a lot of investment companies and so on. I think it's quite simple. There's no difficulty getting investments into an industry that's profitable, especially if the risks are low. It's not more difficult than that. Thank you.
It's a very optimistic intervention. Thank you very much, Thomas.
No. I'm not optimistic. As I said, don't underestimate the power of the incumbent industry. They have enormous economic resources and political connections to block the development. So I'm not optimistic. I just say there is a wonderful opportunity.
Okay, we'll say empowering rather than optimistic. I had some more questions, but I think since we're getting on for time, it would be great to hear some questions from the audience. I mean, the things that I was going to bring up were, Thomas mentioned climate and justice and fairness. Louisa also mentioned the just transition. But also the social acceptance issue around building out renewables is extremely important. We can't make the same mistakes with renewables that we've made with fossil fuels. People need to be involved in this entire transition for it to succeed. So I'd encourage any questions on that issue, any questions on the interplay between politics and regulation and policy, also welcomed. But any other questions that you might have, please do come in. So over to you. We have 2 roving microphones, so please put your hands up. If you'd like to state your affiliation and name, please do, but don't feel any pressure to do so. And as a reminder, please do try to keep your interventions short, and ideally questions rather than comments, unless your comment is really good. Do we have any hands?
Now you scared everyone.
Okay, we have 2 hands. Okay, the gentleman over there. Oh, sorry, I should also have said, if your question is directed at a specific panelist, please do flag that, otherwise I'll do my best to channel it in the right direction.
Hi, Alex Pereira, World Resources Institute, fantastic panel. This is more for, I guess, Louisa. So just thinking about Mexico, and you mentioned the elections. Could you talk a little bit about what you're expecting with the new candidates? Are the new candidates all more aware of climate change? Do we expect the shift in Mexico to open up opportunities to improve regulation? Just if you could talk a little bit about your view of the future politics.
Thank you. Louisa.
Sure, I couldn't hear your name. Can you repeat it just to be addressed to you?
Alex Pereira.
Alex. Oh, okay. So nice to meet you, Alex. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Up to now, well, up to yesterday, if my mind it's with the jet lag is working correctly. Now we were having 3 candidates, but now we have 2 official candidates. So the debate is between 2 women. That's fantastic news. But the way they are approaching the energy policy, it's quite different. But the good news is that, as I was saying in my intervention, the system went through like a paralysis, like a completely paralysis. So that was a very bad, can I put this out? Yeah. So that was very bad news about it. No, all this, like civil society, academia, we were focusing on, instead of going forward, we were defending the transition on the regulatory framework. As I was saying, the regulatory framework was not perfect. One of our things that was missing, for example, was incorporating the justice perspective into the energy reform. It was a success, as Thomas was saying, of reducing the electricity prices, but it lacked of the components of justice, right? Within this administration, when this administration took office, the paralysis and the fourth attempts to backtrack the reform leave the system in a very critical point. So we need capacity to be added. We need investments in transmission lines. We need that the permits that are there, we have plants around less than 2 gigas that are ready to generate electricity, but the permits are not being allowed. So that ecosystem, it's putting a lot of pressure. So independently who wins the elections, the energy, in specifically the power sector and the power probably reform, it's needed. So it's needed in terms of capacity that can be added really, really fast. And if we analyze that, then renewables need and can come or jump in to solve in a really fast manner the situation there. So I won't enter into the debate or one side or the other, but I would say I think we have a good chance that things change independently who wins. And I would focus more on we need to get rid or we need to do a phase out that it's really, really fast with a just perspective. And the condition that we have in Mexico, given and I might start talking a little bit more into like technical stuff, but the condition that we have currently in Mexico with that high dependency on natural gas, it's like a double-sided coin, right? For one side, it can be used, the capacity that we have, to phase out the fuel oil and phase out the coal. And use that capacity that we have, that it's around 60% of generation, to penetrate as fast as we can the renewables, wind and solar. And have the flexibility, because we have pickers in our matrix, to operate the system. And with this opportunity, then, for example, investments in storage can be a little bit postponed, but this is where I need to be cautious. We need regulation in Mexico to foster storage. Storage systems need to be added into the system. And what we learned with our reform is that the market and the political enables can do a substantial reduction in prices. So our market instrument, in my opinion, should start looking into that kind of technologies. Now, another agenda that is pending that we believe it's important to be addressed, it's, for example, green hydrogen. Green hydrogen in Mexico, the potential there is quite high, but that needs to be studied very carefully. But when you have a penetration of that kind in using natural gas, there might, I'm not saying there is, there might be a possibility of reducing the dependency of natural gas by 2030 and start reducing that dependency by penetrating renewables, but also by changing or retrofitting the current combined cycles that are there, because there's technology where you can start penetrating or using green hydrogen into those plants. So it might be an opportunity to decarbonize the power matrix, but this has a lot of aristas, and I'm seeing some faces there, wow, because I know it's a topic, but what I'm saying, it's a pendant topic that either one side or another needs to be addressed. And also, for example, distributed generation. I would expect that distributed generation comes into the debate in Mexico in both agendas. Distributed generation in Mexico, it's lacking of addressing a justice component. Why? Because the design was with a design of market design to reduce the cost, and it's using the local margin prices, right? Electricity prices. But then you are not designing the market to bring some more actors in it. So in our perspective, when we are talking about a just transition, you need more actors to jump in. So we need regulation that addresses at least the four lenses of social justice, right? Not just the recognition, but the redistribution of the justice, right? And the regulation that we have currently in distributed generation, it's lacking of that. It's a good thing for example, enterprises or households, but not local communities that are out there and are the ones that are getting the challenges of shortages given the situation. Those communities are the first that get shortages of electricity. So those, I know it took a lot. I was one of those opponents yesterday that Leo was trying to reduce time. But I would just finish saying, like, there are many pending topics. We have a regulatory framework that we can build up on and hope independently who wins, these topics are addressed and debated in an open and transparent manner. That's it.
Thanks, Louisa. Would anyone else on the panel like to come in on electoral cycles? And Thomas?
I like just to enjoy the fact that Louisa managed to turn the question into the really crucial point, and that is how the market is regulated. Because that is the decisive point for the speed of this transition. I spent my whole career in energy, in industry, and in academia, and in public policy, and one thing I'm sure of is I cannot tell today which of these different technologies that you talked about that will be most competitive in 3 or 5 years' time. So we need to have a market regulation that allows them to compete, and then the efficiency will select the best options. You mentioned one other important point, and that is that the market regulation must be such that also small actors have a fair chance to compete with the big incumbent industries. And this is extremely important in the current situation because many of the new renewable electricity generators are small, especially initially. There may then come large offshore wind parks and things like that, but many of them will be small. And if these new actors do not get access to the market will be unfair, conserving the old and inefficient. Another very important point, if I use your trick and sort of turn over to something else, is that not only has renewables become cheaper than any other source of new electricity, it's actually even so that solar and wind electricity are now cheaper than crude oil per unit energy. This is obscured by the fact that you trade oil in dollars per barrel and electricity in dollar per megawatt hour, so you have to recalculate one into the other. You don't have to be a professor to manage that, but it helps. And if you do that, you see that oil today costs about $50, $60 per megawatt hour, and we talked about electricity now being available between 10 and 40. So renewable electricity is now cheaper per unit energy than oil. So you can start using electricity to replace oil, which we already see in the transport sector, but you can even start using electricity to produce fuels that will compete with oil and sometimes with gas. And that offers opportunities for this balancing in the electricity system that is sometimes used as an argument against renewables. But with these several different new technologies coming into the market at the same time, this will be possible. And trying to run this as a planned economy is going to be very difficult, but with a good market regulation, it will happen quickly.
Thanks, Thomas. I have a panel full of expert political pivot speakers who are able to talk about anything irrespective of your question, but I'll try to keep them focused. So we have a question over there at the back, and then I'll take a few more. The lady down there?
Yeah, greetings to all. My English is not as good as my French, so I may misuse some words. Sorry for that. Actually, Tilda's remarks triggered my question. I come from an oil-producing country. Sorry about that, Thomas. and most of the African countries at this COP28 have a common position where we're saying that, okay, we want to join the adaptation and transition efforts, but we need to be funded for that. But we all know that it's not just about the funding. It's also about making sure that the funding actually benefits to the programs that it's aimed for. And maybe the other panelists can join in on this, but the question is mainly addressed to Tilda and perhaps Mrs. Choi. The question is, with your experience, what would you suggest in terms of options when it comes to partnerships to really make sure that the money gets to the places that it's needed at?
Thank you for this question, and maybe I can start out by echoing my, my panelist over here. Transparency, transparency, transparency. We need to make sure that all these funds that are out there, that everyone has a reading of how are they structured, how are they coordinated, what are they targeting, and we need that to actually be bottom up. So we need it to be locally for each country, that they know what kind of funds are available, who is administering them, and what are they targeting? Is it offshore wind? Is it build out of the electricity grid? Is it energy efficiency? So dialogue and transparency a lot. And actually, I think we have all heard about the Just Energy partnership. Yes, exactly. And I guess that's also what we're all looking at. How will they end up being coordinated? How will they end up being shared? I mean, we just need to keep on working for an open dialogue. And even an open dialogue with these fossil fuels companies that you were mentioning in the beginning, please don't let them stand in their own corner. We need the dialogue. We need to inspire these fossil fuel companies on how can they turn their investments into being more green. Some of them actually want to.
Yes.
Yeah, but I am very much a fan of dialogue, so I always get so sad if we are standing in each corner yelling each other ways. But it was not what you were saying, but it's just we need to invite them in.
Bring out the good example.
Exactly. Yeah, Pastor.
Great. Thanks, Tilda. Jihei, did you want to come in first, and then I'll come back to you, Thomas?
Well, thanks for the question. Maybe since we are missing a panel who are coming from, who was supposed to come from like finance, I think maybe I can add that perspective, because industries and the companies, they also have to engage with the investing communities. And then what I have noted in this scene, or as companies are putting more agenda and putting more drive on sustainability, what has been a very critical factor is that regulations around the finance. Basically, once there is a regulation that mandates the financing communities to make sure that they work on the transparency, to make sure that they invest on the green transition, make sure that their work is on social justice and everything, then the money follows. Then the companies also, work on that kind of guidance, basically. I mean, I'm just talking on very practical and realistic terms. But on a positive note, now that we have all this, political drive around climate talks, as well as the pledges by the national governments, also we have all these regulations around, ESG agenda, basically environmental, social, and governance, and then it all comes down to how companies work on their own the transparency framework. Basically, we need to have a good framework to measure where we are and what kind of impacts that we are making as we are running our business, and then how we communicate that sort of information as well as efforts that we are making to the wide range of stakeholders. I think that's all that matters. And then now that we have a strong drive coming from EU and US and also the Korean government, they have mandated certain rules for companies to act upon it. But I think it eventually provided a enabling environment eventually. I mean, obviously we still need to, we still have a huge room to fill, because we still need concrete guidelines and guidance, and then we have to have a common consensus amongst various stakeholders. But still, the goodwill is there, and then there are a handful of companies like Gender Solution who have a goodwill and good commitment to really contribute to the better world and everything. So I just wanted to again stop with the positive note there, but I hope we can take it to the sideline discussions if you wish. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay. Thomas, super short so that we can get some more questions.
Yeah, but fossil fuel exporting countries and fossil fuel based industries who understand the future threats can change.
Yes.
And Tilde was too humble to mention the Danish oil and natural gas company Dong, that used to be purely fossil fuel company, who is now one of the world's leaders in offshore wind power. So you can be proud, and I can tell it so she doesn't have
Thank
to.
you.
A similar company is Equinor in Norway, that used to be a big oil company that's now also engaging in renewable energy. And if we look at countries, we're now in one region where several of these countries are using the funds that they have built by exporting fossil fuels to invest in renewables and are among the leaders in that development. I'm not sure which of the African oil exporting countries you came from, but there are of course opportunities also in Nigeria, Angola and some of the other oil exporting countries to use these funds to build the future of the country. Some others fail. I don't think Russia has much to benefit from this development because they are utterly unprepared. But many are, both companies and countries.
Yes.
Enjoy that development.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, I think the perhaps this is just a personal opinion, so I wouldn't speak for my institution, but I think many of us were disappointed by what we saw as oil and gas companies in the announcement a couple of days ago, not saying we're going to change, they're saying we're going to be left behind. It's change or left. This is a case of pivoting again, like many of the answers we've seen today. If you don't pivot, you will be left behind. So we have a question over there, and then I'll take this question in here, and then one down here.
Hi, thank you so much for the really interesting panel discussion. My name is Anna Miselu. I work on the Climate Action Tracker. And I have a question for you, Mr. Thomas in Japan. I was curious to hear what your thoughts are on the recent statement from the Environment Minister on Japan not being able to triple renewable energy capacity domestically, and the government potentially thinking about financing renewable energy deployment in developing countries through Article 6. Thank you.
As I'm not really a domestic Japanese, I can be cynical and try to be clear. And my interpretation of Japanese energy policy is that the government has the top priority is avoiding bankruptcies among the existing electric power companies. That is what's guiding their policy. So therefore, they are afraid of rapid growth in renewables, making the coal-fired power stations and old nuclear stations obsolete. And if they had to be written off in the balance sheets of the power companies, they would be bankrupt, and the government wants to avoid that. I can't see any physical reasons, resource reasons, or economic reasons why Japan would not be able to triple renewable electricity or even renewable energy. And it would actually benefit Japan as a country economically, because they would avoid a lot of expensive import of fossil fuel and uranium. So I think it's a financial difficulty for the Japanese government. And the Japanese state debt is, I think, still the highest in relationship to GDP in the world since they passed Zimbabwe in 2013. So they have a rather special financial situation for the government, and they don't want to have to save pension funds and banks and insurance companies that have invested heavily in the electric power companies, and therefore they don't want to run the risk of these power companies going bankrupt. And that is by far the most important reason for them to say what they say and do what they do.
Thank you, Thomas. I'd also note that a couple of days ago, the USA joining the Powering Past Coal Alliance put a huge amount of pressure on Japan, but also South Korea and Australia as the last remaining members, or last major remaining members of the OECD, to not have committed to a coal-fired power phase-out. So pressure there on Japan to shift out of the fossils as well as into the renewables. We have a question down here.
Thank you all for this panel. I'm Omar Salam from University of Leeds, and again, Thomas, regarding the lobbying that you mentioned and the power of the fossil fuel companies in lobbying for policies, from your point of view, and I think we can use the Congress member point of view also, what is the best way for youth, especially in local communities, to fight this lobbying and overcome it, to accelerate also the renewables in local level? Yeah, thank you.
It will be difficult, especially with the opportunities that social media provide for rather intense campaigning, where disinformation may spread very efficiently, effectively, without being possible to contradict. I think we can only rely on low-key, factual arguments, preferably in real physical settings like this one, where behavior is somewhat constrained compared to what you can say and do on social media. Because we need a civilized democratic discussion. One advantage of that is that you might learn something even if you believe that you're right. I enjoy that. Still, I'm not older than that.
Thanks, Thomas. Tilda.
And maybe just to add on to that, that the young generation, you need to demand to know what is the green profile of these companies. You need to keep on saying, we want to know what is it that you do, what kind of actions do you take, when will you have a CO2 neutral production. I mean, ask Nike, ask all these iPhone, ask them and demand to know, because it's you could almost pressure them into making it into a business case, right? ESG and these kind of thoughts. But I think we need to stand up as users and just say, buyers, we want to know.
Great, thank you. So I'll take these two questions and then give a few minutes to our panelists to close. So this one here and then the lady.
Thank you.
Back.
My name is James. I'm from Uganda, and my question goes to Luisa. Luisa, we have similar problems, and transmission is one of our biggest issues. So in Uganda, we are piloting wind, and we're currently doing feasibility studies up in the northeast, but there's no transmission. And that's a big, so as you're trying to develop the bureaucracy of trying to develop wind power, which is new, we also have transmission that there is no transmission at all. So how have you dealt with this, and have you privatized building of transmission lines? We are also piloting the privatization of transmission lines in Uganda, but that is still, the framework is still in progress. So maybe we can learn something from you. Thank you.
Great, thanks James. Louisa.
That's a really, really good question. Unfortunately, we haven't solved the problem of transmission in Mexico. But I would say the regulation that we have, well, it's a transmission in Mexico, it's a natural monopoly, it's considered natural monopoly, exactly. So, but I would say the reform, the current legislation that we have, the law, the electricity industry law that we have, consider the possibility of having private participation in transmission. Yes, there are some cases that we can gladly share. That, for example, for wind, in the beginning of the reform, some private sector investments were investing in transmission line, and that got a specific fee for their projects. But then it was like very, very polemic about it when the government changed, and it was a key narrative that was being used against, for example, wind projects in Mexico. I do not have, unfortunately, I don't have like a case study for you that was successful. But what we are seeing, because we are also working on distributed energy resources, is that if and Mexico, I don't like to give just one solution, because in Mexico we have a good thing that it's like the way our territory is and the way you can operate the system. So we are working on distributed energy resources, and what we are seeing is when we are connecting, it depends on the point of the transmission situation and region that we are speaking out, but when you put distributed energy resources, then you can postpone the investments needed into transmission. And for example, in Mexico, even though the coverage of the users that we have, it's 99%, we have 2 million of people not connected. And one of the debate was, should we invest in transmissions or should we invest in renewables with batteries? And what we are seeing is in those critical points, it's more feasible economically and in terms of the land, to do that kinds of interventions. And also, when you deploy distributed generation, within the households. So the investments need to be not in transmission, but into the distribution lines, which can be cheaper. There's no one solution for all, but I can share later, some cases.
Thank you, Luisa. Okay, last question, and then we'll come to some closing remarks from the panelists. The lady over there, do we have a mic? Thanks, Geek.
Thank you very much. My name is Advera. I'm from Tanzania. I'm working with the Rural Energy Agency, where we are supporting the small mini grid with less than 10 megawatt. My first question goes to Luisa on how have you packaged yourself to manage the upgrading the transmission network, but at the same time also increasing the capacity of generation in renewable energy, because these have to go together. I just want to know, in budget-wise and in financial-wise, how have you kept yourself? How are you going to manage? Because you need to achieve more with a short time, despite of all these challenges you have in our country. The second question goes to Madam Helston. I just want to know if you have any experience whereby you have the distributed generation and those private sector are also allowed to sell the power to the society around that particular area. And now the problem comes on the tariff, especially in my country. We are facing the tariff issue. The people who are served with the private sector, with the distribution generators, is quite high compared to those who are served by the national grid. I just want to know, how did you manage, if you have such a particular experience? Thank you.
Okay, you have 1 minute each, and then we'll come back to closing. So, Louisa?
I'll be super fast because I already, that goes along with the other question that I was answering, and I would just build on what it's very important, as in Mexico it's a natural, well, it's a monopoly that it's within the Federal Electricity Commission. One thing that all the panelists other panelists were mentioning, a key point is transparency. The flows, the economic flows and financial flows that are being as a profit in transmission subsidiary are not being used for expanding or for the transmission or distribution itself. So one key thing is the transparency of the public finances, and how that subsidiary is being used, and where does that money is being. That's one thing. And the other, distributed energy resources can be a solution that can postpone investments into transmission lines. That's it,
Brilliant, thank you. Hilda.
Yes, just real quick. Denmark has been supporting the public grid and having one grid, but just recently we started working with direct lines, so meaning lines that goes directly from the offshore wind park to the hydrogen factories. It's a very new initiative in Denmark. I think it's only like 1 year old, but it's just to say we are also beginning to think that way. But Denmark is a very flat country. We have no mountains. I'm not saying it's easy to make a grid in Denmark, but it is easy. It's costly, but it's easy. But just recently, we've started looking into the direct lines. But listening to our friend from Uganda, I mean, our landscape is totally different.
Thank you, Tilda. Okay, we have 5 minutes. So 1 minute from each of you, closing remarks. Where do you think we are? What's the most interesting thing you've heard? Take your pick. Thomas, starting with you.
I think I'll also comment on the grid issue, because that will be important. Without transmission, no transition, as one of my colleagues said yesterday. You could allow private construction of power lines to a new wind farm or a new industry or something. But I believe that the most rational way is to do like the British do with their offshore wind, that the private developer builds the power line with construction costs limited by procurement rules, and then when the wind power plant is put into operation, they sell it to the national grid at the cost of construction, and then they start paying for using it as all other producers or customers, depending on the regulation. That avoids the risk of transmission system operators lacking the capacity to build new lines, which is a problem in many countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Jihek.
I'll be very brief. I mean, first of all, I really enjoyed the discussions. There has been very honest discussions and honest questions from the floor, which I really appreciated it. Now we have to act upon the common goal, and for that, I think interplay, also interactions between all the different stakeholders is key. Governments, subnationals, subnational governments, and private sector, finance, and civil society. I think they should come together, and then they have to discuss in an honest and transparent manner. So, on that note, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jihei. Tilda.
I will just put my 2 cents to the two-way street partnerships, that it is so important that we share both our good solutions but also our wrong turns. And it is in regards to regulation, it is in regards to technology, to banking systems. We need to start sharing across borders and globally.
Thank you. That was very concise. Louisa, you have probably 90 seconds.
Yeah, I would say there's no one solution for all.
No.
There's no, like the cookie cutter effect cannot be replicated elsewhere. But what we do have, it's like technology is ready. It's more like it's economically feasible, like when we're talking about renewables. But what we are definitely lacking is incorporating the social component of the transition, and that's something that we should be addressing in not only the regulatory market, but the financials, regulation, instruments, and also the governance of the projects. That's it.
Completely agreed. Thank you very much. So I'd like to say thank you to some excellent panelists, brilliant speakers, really good questions from the floor. So thank you to all of you who attended in person, and many thanks to those online. And hopefully we can see all of the renewables ambition that we're seeing outside the text, along with fossil fuel language reflected in the text over the coming days. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Well, the questions went in all directions, didn't they?